Provost Marshal and Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence and Security at the Air Defense Command at NORAD in Colorado Springs. He was also assigned to the Military Advisory Group in Bangkok, Thailand following the Vietnam War. Now, Colonel Weible has a granddaughter here at Niwot High School, Haley Jacks, and then Haley's mom, Patty Craig, also serves on the Niwot High School Foundation Board of Directors. So please put your hands together and welcome Colonel Weible. He's going to tell us a little bit about the 10th Mountain Division and the experiences there.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'm very happy to be here. I don't think you probably wouldn't be able to find too many old 10th Mountain people, that is from the original division anyway, in World War II. But it's just wonderful to be here anyway. So I'll talk for just a few minutes about Camp Hale itself, about the 10th Mountain Division, the organizational structure, and then I'll go into a bit on our training. First, Camp Hale. How many here have been up to the old Camp Hale site? A few have been. There's a lot of history up there, and if you haven't been up there, I would recommend it. I think it's quite interesting. Camp Hale itself is about 7 miles north of Leadville, and it extends about 2 miles or so down Pando Valley. There's a flat valley down there that's almost dozed flat. And that was the cantonment area where we lived and operated from. But we did most of our training in the area around Camp Hale, on up 10, 11, 12,000 feet up toward Holy Cross, Sugarloaf, and mountains like that. In the extreme north side of Camp Hale, just a little beyond Camp Hale, was a little town of Red Cliff. That's where we did our rock climbing. I'll talk a little bit about that later also. And the valley narrows down at that point to just a very, very small narrow valley. Now, as far as the 10th Mountain Division itself is concerned, well, I should mention that Camp Hale was really built for a light division. And the 10th was a light division and didn't really get the name Mountain until in 1944. Before that, it was referred to as the 10th Light Division. And the reason for that was that we had no tanks. You know, a normal infantry division has a tank company in each regiment, and it has a tank battalion. And it has heavy artillery and medium artillery. We didn't have either one of those. But what we did have was a Pack 75. And this was a small piece of artillery that was carried by mules. Three mules could carry one piece of artillery. 2 wheels on a mule, the barrel on a mule, and the breech on a mule. And then a trail of mules behind bringing up the ammunition. I might mention also that in the winter of 1943 and 44, while I was there, we had an unusually heavy snow, very heavy snow. Sometimes we'd be maneuvering or skiing in the valleys back up above Camp Hale, and all you would see would be a stovepipe sticking up. And there was a cabin below that. We had just an awful lot of snow. I haven't seen that much in Colorado, I don't think, at that time. Maybe they knew we were coming. We didn't have very many vehicles in the 10th Mountain Division, but we did have one vehicle that was became quite well known, but didn't really prove to be too practical, and it was a Weasel. I don't know if you've ever heard of a Weasel or seen one. They were a full track vehicle, about 10 or 12 feet long, maybe a little less, but wide tracks, a couple feet wide, and they could almost scoot right over any of the snow and not sink in. One of the drawbacks, however, was that occasionally they would throw a track. And when they threw a track, that was a major catastrophe. You just had difficulty getting hold of that. The 10th was made up primarily of 3 infantry regiments. The 87th was an old regiment. As a matter of fact, before the 10th was ever activated, they had a small battalion of ski troops up at Fort Lewis, Washington that trained up on Mount Rainier. Those people came down to Camp Hale eventually and were used quite extensively as a cadre to activate and train the 86th Infantry, which was the 2nd regiment that was formed, and then later the 85th Infantry. I joined the 85th Infantry when I finished basic training at Camp Roberts, California in late 1943, and several of us had heard of the 10th Mountain Division. Most of us was from northern states, myself being from Montana, and were skiers, and they wanted to get in the 10th Mountain Division, and they were happy to have us. They wanted volunteers at that time. And we were all accepted, and we all came to the 10th Mountain, and the first thing we did when we got up at Camp Hale was have 2 weeks of sort of an acclimation period, getting used to the altitude, which the camp itself was a little over 9,000 feet. But it took us 2 weeks to get used to that, and then we were issued our winter equipment, such things as skis, snowshoes, sleeping bags, and we had an extremely warm sleeping bag. There's a light canvas on the outside and a down bag inside of that, and then a wool bag inside of that. So they were very good. They were a little bit heavy, but they were good sleeping bags. This period of about 2 weeks, we also had some degree of orientation, not a lot, but some. And after we finished with that 2 weeks, we went out for ski training for about 10 days or a little bit longer. We didn't become master skiers by any means, but we all learned enough that we could get by. We knew how to snow plow and stem pole Christie and things like that. And then you were expected to improve as time went on, and I'm sure most of them did. As far as myself was concerned, I started out with skiing, but then my company commander found out that I had been trained as an 81 mortar man, and we couldn't ski and carry those mortars. So we wore snowshoes more than we skied, but we did ski on the weekends, however, so we did manage to get out there a little. After about 10 days of ski training, the division decided that we should go on an extended march up into the National Forest. We left the cantonment area at about a little after noon, one afternoon, and marched up Tennessee Pass, or up to Tennessee Pass, turned off into the National Forest, and by this time it was just about dark. We walked for another hour or so, and someone sent word down the line that this is where we're going to stop and spend the night. So we were shown where we would bivouac, and we cut branches off of the trees, laid them down in the snow, put our sleeping bag down, and of course it was emphasized very much that you keep things in your sleeping bag or right close by, so that you know exactly where it's at. And we had a D-bar for dinner that night, and I think everyone was exhausted, especially people like us who were into the light air for the first time. We went to bed and slept. I woke up the next morning right at daylight, and I don't know why I woke up so early, but I did. And I looked around, and there was nobody there. There had been about 6 or 8 inches of fresh snow during the night. I couldn't see anybody. So I thought, oh my God, they've moved out during the night and left me here. And that's what I thought happened. I got my gear together as rapidly as I could, and I thought I knew the direction we came in from. And just about the time I got my rucksack ready to go, I saw the snow move. And pretty soon I heard some voices. And what a relief that was to know that there was some company there. After we had gone through that session, we went through a lot of winter exercises, particularly gunnery exercises. And later on in 43 and early 44, we went through what was called a D-series maneuver. This was a period where we lived in the field for about 8 weeks. We couldn't have any fire, we couldn't have any light at night at all, and everything was tactical. And that was real good training. I don't know how much we enjoyed it, but it was good training. And after we had completed that, of course, we're back in the cantonment area, and by this time it was in early 1944. In fact, we did more training in the field, a lot of night training, a lot of firing of our weapons. And with an 81 millimeter mortar, we became pretty proficient with that. The goal was always to be able to bring up the weapon and place it, fire 9 rounds on a target, and get that weapon out of there before the first round hit the ground. That was just about impossible. We never quite made that. We'd get 6 or 7 rounds in the air perhaps, but we never were able to get 9. The only place that I ever saw that done really was at Fort Benning, Georgia. And they had a team down there that just did that all the time. After our D-series maneuvers were finished, and additional training, particularly at night time, we were scheduled to take our rock climbing training. That stood the division in good stead in Italy, but we were down to Red Cliff, and we saw these vertical cliff of rocks, and they said, well, your job is to climb up to the top of there and then rappel down. Well, we started that. We had some good instruction. We had a lot of instruction before we ever did that. But when we did, we'd drive a piton into a little crack in the rock, make sure that it was solid, and pull yourself up, drive in another piton, pull yourself up, and continue until you reach the top. A lot of people wouldn't do that. They didn't. It was pretty risky in the first place, but if they, I think the instructors felt if they got up halfway or something like that and got frozen up there, it'd be kind of hard to get them out. And so if they didn't really want to do it, they weren't forced to do so. I thought it was a lot of fun myself. I went up several times and then rappelled back down where you had a nylon rope and it came down and you took your left hand, brought it down between your legs, and down over this shoulder. And this right hand was what you stopped yourself with if you wanted to stop your decline. And it was very easy to do, and nothing to it. It was, I thought, a lot of fun. After our rock climbing was finished, and a couple more weeks of intensive training, the division got orders to go to Camp Swift, Texas. We were expecting this. It came as no surprise because we thought the division would shake down and it would go to Italy. Shortly after we got down to Camp Swift, I'd been promoted to private first class by this time, and I was pretty proud of that. And after I'd been promoted, I guess a couple of months later, I was promoted to corporal. And my company commander called me in one day, and he said, have you ever thought about OCS? And OCS, in military language, meant Officers Candidate School. I told him I had not thought about it, and he told me he thought I should. And he was a Dartmouth graduate himself, and he was also an OCS graduate. And I thought he was a great individual. But I had a lot of friends in the division, so I wasn't anxious to leave the division. I really wanted to go with him. But he convinced me, he told me that anyone that goes to OCS and completes the course will come back to the 10th Mountain Division. And the division had made those arrangements in Washington. Well, I did go ahead and take the battery of tests and do it before the board and so forth. And fortunately, I was selected to go to OCS at the infantry school at Fort Benning. It was about 4 or 5 months long, and when I came back, the division had already deployed to Italy. So they put those of us that were left here in the States in a pool that was held as a division needed replacements. We get orders to join the division. And I graduated in December, and this was probably about end of February, near March. I got my orders to go out to Oklahoma and pick up a bunch of mules. And we used, as I mentioned before, mules to carry the artillery pieces and carry ammunition. And so I got out there and I found that they had 720 mules and a little detachment of enlisted men. So we loaded those on boxcars, went down through New Orleans, put them on a freighter, and ready to head for Italy. And no sooner had we got started than the ship's captain got a message and said, "Turn around and go back." And apparently it was determined at this point, and this is about mid-April by now, that the war was so near over that they just didn't need us or the mules. I don't know what happened to the mules. We unloaded them when we got back. And I was sent to the South Pacific, where I joined another infantry division in the Philippines. And that was the extent of my service in the 10th Mountain, and I regret that it really wasn't all that much. I did get involved with great training, great people, a wonderful bunch of people to work with. Many of them were from up in the Northeast, Ivy League colleges, and many of them were just plain Joes like me. But we had a fine division, and I'm sorry I didn't get to go with it. But that is my story of my involvement with the 10th Mountain Division. I tried to follow them a bit, in news from where we were in the Philippines, but that was pretty much impossible. The war ended, for all intents and purposes, about mid-April in Europe, and it's still going strong in the Pacific at that time. But that is my story of the 10th Mountain, and after we're all finished, I'll be out in the lobby, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.